May I have your attention, please? Thank you. Very good morning to all of you. As lockdown is continuing, we are not getting the chance to meet face to face in our real classroom as we used to do. So, till then, it would be better for us to get connected through online system. The broader topic of today's discussion is Grace Elegy written in a country churchyard. But before I start the lecture, it would be better for you to study the text of Elegy first. It will be very helpful in understanding the lecture. The topic of lecture today is Grace Elegy Foreshadows Romanticism. Groff has pointed out that Gray is the last champion of the classical school and his poetry has no romantic coloring. The fact is something else. Gray has a strange duality. While belonging to the age by a very conscious Elysians, he is instinctively and almost unconsciously is drawn towards Romanticism. Like that of Collins, Gray's poetry partakes of the features of the neoclassical age as well as of the Romantic period. It is not wrong to say that Gray began in the tradition of Dryden and Pope and ended in the manner of Wordsworth. Like Wordsworth, Gray is a poet of domestic temperament, sympathizes with the rude forefathers whose destiny is obscure. Excuse me. He sings in praise of those who, like the gem of purest ray serene, lie hidden. This attitude of Gray brings him closer to the poets like Wordsworth and Shelley, who glorify common people like farmers and workers. In the very opening of the poem, he builds up an atmosphere, the ruling passion of which is pastoralism. The poet writes, the curfew tolls the knell of the parting day, the lowing herd wind slowly over the lea, the ploughman homeward plods his weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me. The lowing herd and the ploughman create the pastoral backdrop against which the drama of the rude forefathers of the hamlet with all their homespun joys is enacted. The atmosphere of pastoral solitude we find in Wordsworth Michael is enriched by the scene of domestic joys here. The poet writes, for them no more the blazing hearth shall burn, or busy housewife ply her evening care. No children run to lisp their sire's return, or climb his knees the envied kiss to share. Blazing hearth, sire's return, and children running to get the envied kiss point to the domestic bliss which the dead cannot experience. It is thus obvious that the stuff out of which the poetic pattern emerges is related to familiar experience of the day-to-day life. This perhaps is the reason that Dr. Johnson has observed. This elegy abounds with sentiments to which every bosom returns an echo. This remark of Johnson indicates not only the familiarity but also the universality of the subject matter. Gray shares with the Romantics not only their interest in the joys and woes of day-to-day life, but also their love of nature. Gray anticipates Keats when he builds up the sensuous picture of the refreshing dawn. The poet writes, the breezy call of incense-breathing morn, the swallow twittering from the astra-built thud, the cock's shrill clarion, or the echoing horn, no more shall rouse them from their lowly bed. Olfactory and auditory sensations, reinforced by picturesque images of countryside life, establish Gray's identity with that of Keats on the poetic plane. In creating the scene of harvest, Gray's description in this poem reminds us of Wordsworth's Solitary Reaper or Keats's Ode to Autumn. The poet writes, oft did the harvest to their sickle yield, their furrow oft the stubborn glebe hedge broke. How jocund did that drive their team afield, how bowed the woods beneath their sturdy stroke. All these details pertaining to domestic and pastoral life cannot but create the impression that Gray's sensibility is typically romantic. Gray is equally romantic in his advocacy of the poor farmers of the hamlet, with all their homely joys and destiny obscure. He showed the way to the poets of the Romantic Revival by pointing out that verse may build a princely throne on humble truth. He points out that the life of the rustics is made of useful toil and harmful joys. Gray observes that there may be among them men with the genius of great poets or great rulers. Opportunities were denied to them, and so they could not acquire the fame which they deserved. Poverty crushing their potentiality to oblivion. Like the gem of the purest serene, they remained hidden in the womb of obscurity. But their obscure destiny also saved them from the crimes of bloodshed and suppression of truth. It forwarded them to humiliate themselves by dedicating their poetic compositions in terms of flattery to men of wealth. The poet stage. Some village Hampden that with dauntless breast, the little tyrant of its fields with a stud, some mute inglorious Milton here may rest, some Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood, they never shut the gate of mercy on mankind. It is thus patent that Gray emerged as a great democrat. Like the Romantics, he is the champion of the downtrodden humanity. Thus, the elegy advocates those virtues which became pronounced in the poetry of the Romantics. The content and contour of the poem appeal to the sensibility of the people of all walks of life. It is widely universal in appeal. Everything presented in the poem has the touch of familiarity. The generalized tone of the poet from the very beginning creates this appeal. The poet hits upon the universal truth when he says that the rude forefathers lying buried will not respond to the twittering of the swallows or the clarion call of the cock. Neither the housewife nor the children will care for them any longer. The elegy also reveals Gray as neoclassical scholar who had learned to think as well as to explore himself with all the polish and neatness of a speech. Full many a gem of purest rain, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear, full many a flower is born to blush unseen, and waste its sweetness in the desert air. It is something which has affinity with Wordsworth's way of thinking and Dryden's way of expressing in clarity and neatness. The slow, measured movement of the poem carries ponderings that include the fireside, family affection, oppression, conceit, and flattery. Gray has too many voices. We associate with the neoclassical poets. The glossy, unfeeling diction which Wordsworth condemned is very frequent in this poem. There is not in him the daring to shake himself entirely free from the rigid conventions of that artificial and prosaic school. In the poem, the poet's emphasis on the elevation of poetic diction links him with the neoclassical poets. The use of personification leads to the elevation of style. For example, we can take the following. Can honest voice provoke the silent dust, or flattery soothe the dull cold ear of death? Honor and flattery are instances of needless personification of abstract qualities which abound in the poetic diction of the 18th century. References and allusions, so favorite with neoclassical poets, have been used here to give majesty to the poetic diction. Under the influence of Milton and Dryden, he adopts the grand and sonorous manner, with all the pomp and glittering array of Latinized expressions. In each stanza of the poem, the unforced, measured movement is used admirably to carry the feeling of melancholy that goes with the thought. The neoclassical garniture clings like a suckling parasite round the genuine but tender sapling of Gray's sensibility, which is at once neoclassical and romantic. The combination of his head and heart resulted in transforming Gray into the finest flower of the Augustan poetry, carrying within itself the seeds of romantic poetry. Thank you.